May 15, 2016, 8 a.m. in the morning. A bank employee was sitting alone in his office, waiting for his shift to end. The country was asleep, and soon he was ready to join them. But then, an alert popped off. His heart skipped, fingers hesitating over the mouse. Not now, not with the night almost behind him. Something wasn't right. The fraud detection system had flagged multiple suspicious transactions. They were small, but quick. At first, it didn't make sense. Small transactions, nothing unusual by themselves. But something felt off. It was late, and the whole country was asleep. Why are there so many withdrawals happening right now? Then it hit him hard in the face. 14,000 transactions in less than 3 hours. His heartbeat ran faster. This was no glitch. This wasn't the usual transaction volume you'd expect to see at 8 a.m. on an ordinary Sunday in Japan. With shaking hands, he went to check the total withdrawn cash amount, and the number on the screen left him speechless. Over 1.4 billion yen were gone from the bank's liquid funds. $13 million in cash had disappeared in less than 3 hours. At that point, he knew what was happening. He needed to act fast. The bank was under attack. In an undisclosed location far from the bustling streets of Tokyo, a middle-aged Asian man sits silently at his desk. He is the mastermind of the entire operation. His real identity? Nobody knows. Let's just call him Takumi Kojima. No one knows where he is exactly from, but one thing is certain. He had strong ties with North Korea, and what he is doing here right now is about to unleash chaos on an entire nation. In this location, stacks of credit cards lay in neat piles, waiting to be transformed. Takumi Kojima stood over a sleek industrial-grade card printer, methodically feeding the blank cards into the machine. From the other side, the machine spits out credit cards. The cards were fake, but the data encoded on them, they were real bank accounts. But how exactly did he get his hands on these bank accounts? Months earlier, far from Japan's shores, a team of unknown hackers breached the systems of a South African bank, quietly slipping past the firewalls and into the heart of its data. The breach went unnoticed, no alarms or red flags. Thousands of bank accounts were compromised, but the bank wouldn't find out until it was far too late. The malware used in this hack was similar to a malware previously linked to North Korean hacker groups. They were the prominent suspects in this incident. With the stolen data and counterfeit cards ready, Takumi's next step was to execute the plan. What was his target? Japan. But why Japan? Japan was one of the few developed nations still heavily reliant on magnetic strip technology for bank cards. While most countries had transitioned to more secure chip and pin systems, Japan's ATMs were vulnerable. These old machines were the perfect target, and Takumi knew it. The first step of the plan was complete, but this was just the beginning. Now, the real challenge began. What was his next move? Deploying an army of mules to bleed Japan dry. 1 a.m. Sunday, May 15, 2016. An emergency meeting had been called. Over 100 criminals were gathered. This is what they signed up for. They were low-level thugs, grifters, and members of Japan's most feared criminal organizations. Some had ties to the Yakuza, and others worked for smaller criminal organizations. They were drawn from the darkest corners of Japan and hired through secret criminal networks and anonymous online channels. But there was one thing on the mind of Takumi: fear. For a plan on this scale to work, Takumi believed in one thing: only the paranoid survive. He feared there could be undercover cops among them. A single move could bring down everything he had spent months preparing. So, until tonight, until Zero Day, he had kept the entire scheme a top secret. And now, Zero Day has come. The room went quiet as Takumi stepped forward. This was the moment of truth. The plan was about to unfold. Takumi didn't believe what he was doing was a crime. In his eyes, only a poorly executed crime would be called a criminal act, but a well-planned one should be called a masterpiece of art. And he was the artist who brought this art to life. The plan was simple, deadly but simple. Each mule would carry around 16 counterfeit credit cards, all loaded with real bank data stolen months before. Their job was to drain cash from as many ATMs as they could. But this wasn't a free-for-all. No, Takumi demanded precision. Each mule was assigned to carry out a total of 140 withdrawal transactions. But there was one golden rule: don't stay in one place too long. Japan was about to be hit from all sides. 17 cities would feel the shock of the heist, but Tokyo and Osaka, these cities would receive the biggest hits. Takumi's mules had to move like shadows, in and out, before anyone could react. But Takumi knew that no ATM would survive 140 withdrawal transactions. With this scale, the ATMs would run dry in a matter of minutes. So he carefully instructed each money mule that between every 10 transactions, the ATM must be changed. This was the golden ratio to keep the money flowing smoothly and prevent any alarms from being triggered. Each mule was given a list, a precise list of ATM targets. These ATMs weren't randomly scattered across the city. No, each list was meticulously crafted. The ATMs were strategically chosen to be near one another, allowing the mules to hit as many machines as possible in the shortest span of time. The goal: maximize efficiency. They needed to cover the ground quickly without drawing drawing attention, and more importantly, the lists were designed to ensure no mule would cross paths with another one and no ATM would be hit twice. Every move was choreographed to perfection, but when the money mules received their lists, a wave of confusion swept through the room. Every single ATM they had been assigned was located at a 7-Eleven. They were expecting a variety of locations, but instead it was just these convenience stores. Why? What was so special about 7-Eleven? The answer lies in the weakness of Japan's ATM network. At the time, unlike many other ATMs in Japan, which were restricted to local cards, 7-Eleven ATMs were among the few in Japan that accepted foreign-issued cards. Also, these ATMs still used outdated magnetic stripe technology. With over 20,000 locations across Japan, 7-Eleven stores were practically on every street, allowing the mules to move swiftly between machines without drawing any attention. At first, the mules were confused, but once the plan was laid out, it made sense. 7-Eleven ATMs were a gold mine, easily exploitable, widely available, and primed for the taking. Takumi had turned a simple convenience store into the epicenter of one of the most daring heists in history. But Takumi wasn't just relying on careful planning, he needed his mules to be driven. So, to ensure each mule was motivated to extract as much cash as possible, he promised them a cut from whatever they pulled in. The more they withdrew, the bigger their share. It wasn't just a heist anymore, it was a race for money and a race against time. And every mule was in it for the highest payout they could get. As the final instructions were given, the tension in the room was undeniable. Each mule had their assignment and list of targets. Now, they had just few hours to disperse across Japan to their designated locations. As they were preparing to leave, they were given the final words.
At 5 a.m. in the morning, the heist begins.
Sunday, May 15, 2016, 5 a.m. in the morning. The streets of Japan were still. The sun hadn't yet risen, and most of the country was still asleep. But in the shadows, the operation had already begun. 100 money mules, spread across 17 cities, slipped through the early morning calm, heading to their assigned ATMs. The heist was officially underway. Takumi, the mastermind behind it all, stayed in close contact with each of his mules. He knew the risks. If anything went wrong, if one mule was caught, it could undermine the entire operation. He had eyes on the ground and a plan in motion. They chose this time, 5 a.m., for a reason. They wanted to avoid suspicion. At this hour, the streets were empty. Most of Japan was still asleep. The fewer the eyes, the better. But it wasn't just about the hour, it was about the day itself. Sunday. This was a weekend with most banks and financial institutions closed and most employees off work. Although some staff were present, they will focus on anything other than ATMs. Takumi knew this gave them a window of nearly 48 hours of silence before the heist would be discovered. When most employees returned Monday morning, the money would be gone and the money mules would have disappeared. The first hour passed without a hitch. The mules moved like ghosts, hitting their targets with precision. By now, they had already made a severe stride toward their goal, the cash flowing smoothly into their hands. Everything was running according to plan, but they don't know that this would not last that long. As the clock passed 6 a.m., the city began to wake up. The first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, and with them, more eyes on the streets. Some of the money mules began to report something troubling, increased suspicion in the areas where they were operating. At that moment, Takumi knew the clock had started ticking against him. Every minute that passed brought more chances for someone to notice the unusual activity at the ATMs. Takumi sent his team a single urgent message.
Increase your withdrawal rate. Time is against us.
He knew that if just one mule was caught, it would mean a disaster. They would talk, they would snitch, and then a manhunt would sweep through the streets of Japan, leaving nowhere to hide. For the heist to succeed, every mule had to finish their withdrawals and carry over the cash to the couriers. Anything other than that, the plan will collapse. But there was one thing Takumi didn't know. Someone else had already started to notice, and soon everything would begin to unwind. Not so far away in the headquarters of 7 Bank, an employee sat alone, ready to end his night shift. The office was still. The only sound was the hum of his computer. But just as he prepared to log off, something strange flickered on his screen. The bank's fraud detection system had flagged a series of transactions as suspicious. His heart begins racing as he stares at the screen. What was happening? He quickly opened the system to find out more about these transactions. And what he found was a disaster. The system showed thousands of transactions happening in a rapid succession. The amounts per transaction weren't massive, but the sheer volume was shocking. In just under 3 hours, 14,000 withdrawals had been made. Over $13 million was missing from the bank's liquid funds. The pattern was clear. The ATMs were clustered near each other, all happening while the entire country slept. He knew instantly this wasn't a glitch. The bank was under attack, and thousands of dollars were bleeding out with every passing minute. He needed to act fast. By 8 a.m., the streets of Japan were alive, and so was the tension in Takumi's command center. He had been watching closely, tracking every message from his mules, scanning for any sign of trouble. So far, they have made tremendous progress, but then something changed. Reports started flowing in, one by one. The mules were sending the same alarming message. Their transactions were being blocked. The ATMs spitting out cash just hours before were now denying withdrawals. Takumi didn't take much longer to figure out what was happening. He knew the party he started was over. Takumi didn't want to let greed for having more destroy what he had already got, so he took the decision. In a split-second decision, the money mules received a broadcast message.
The heist is over. Submit the cash to your allocated intermediary and leave the country now.
For the mules, it was a race to disappear. They had to deliver the stolen cash and vanish before anyone could catch up with them. But for Takumi, the game was already over. He knew where he was heading next. He knew North Korea was waiting for him. The bank employee, shaken by what he had discovered, didn't waste a second. He reported the incident to his manager, who had been enjoying his weekend off. But this was no ordinary issue. As soon as the call ended, they knew this was a bigger issue. The manager wasted no time. The police were immediately notified, and just like that, the investigation began. As the authorities started digging into the case, they soon discovered something that stunned them. Reviewing the CCTV footage was like watching a well-choreographed dance of criminals. An army of money mules moving simultaneously, hitting ATMs in a coordinated wave across Japan. Each of them works with military precision, and each step brings them closer to pulling off one of the most audacious heists in history. By the time the dust settled, the numbers were staggering. 1.4 billion yen, $13 million, had just vanished from 7 banks' liquid assets. The mules were gone, the cash disappeared, and the mastermind nowhere to be found.